I'm autistic at 24. Before then, I honestly just thought that I was very sensitive, that I had anxiety, that I struggled with depression, that I had IBS, and that I was just very different to everyone else. I'm Tabitha and this is my story so far. I found out literally last year that I'm autistic, and since then it has been kind of like reanalyzing my whole life experience through this new lens of autism. And I'm not gonna lie, it's brought up so much grief, so much like guilt and shame, and I've really had to hold so much compassion and self-love for myself, especially because around the time that I was told by a specialist that I am autistic, I hit burnout. My whole life blew up, my career came to an end. I have been stuck at home for the last, I think it's getting on to 10 months now, so almost a whole year, and it's been a hard time. So I kind of wanted to make this video in case you are autistic, you are neurodivergent, or you're just interested in the subject or interested in the story. Maybe you will feel seen in a lot of my experiences. I know I've shared briefly about some of these things through like my Instagram, for example, and I do get messages pretty much every day with people telling me how seen they felt in my content and how they just don't feel as weird anymore because I'm sharing my experiences. So hopefully you get that from this video. So yeah, let's just dive in. Growing up, I was always that shy kid. I was the kid that at parents' evenings my mum would get told that I was shy, I didn't talk that much, I was great at getting on with my work and just getting everything done, but in terms of socialising I was very timid and I wouldn't really participate in class in the terms of putting my hand up, answering questions, putting myself out there. And that was every single year for parents' evening. My mum would get told the same thing again and again and again, and even from like distant family and family friends and everything like that, the feedback that I would always get growing up was Tabitha is a really lovely girl, she's shy, she's timid. It was all the same kind of narrative, and growing up, you know, I just thought I was just like that. Like I just didn't understand it. I remember a lot of experiences growing up where I would specifically isolate myself from the people around me, from my peers, and there was many times where I would do things for the teachers so I wouldn't have to be in those social situations. Looking back now we understand why. Have the hindsight and the knowledge, it's just like, ah, that makes so much sense. But when you're living it, you just kind of accept it because it's your reality. Like you don't think to challenge what's going on, because why would you when it's all you know. I remember there was one specific time where these boys in my class, I must have been about, I don't know, maybe like 8, and these boys in my class were doing something, you know, naughty, and I remember thinking, why aren't they just like sticking to the rules? And I just couldn't grasp the fact that people didn't want to abide by the rules, because to me rules and having that structure gave me stability in every area of my life, and I always grew up like that. So when it got to secondary school, I was overwhelmed, to be honest, by not really understanding the structure of everything, because all of a sudden, you know, the shift from primary school to secondary school till year 16 like it was very much like a lot of the time I'd feel like I'd have to guess. Like we had these structures and rules for the school and how we should do our days and how we go about that. But apart from that, it was very confusing because every single individual teacher expected different things of you, and it left me in what I thought was a state of anxiety for the whole time I was there. I really struggled with secondary school, like massively so. And a lot of the time I would spend my lunch breaks and things in the library because it was quieter. I would always read a book and kind of just like again isolate myself from my peers. I had a close knit group of friends, but mainly they were friends that I'd grown up with since I was about 3 years old, because again I struggled to make friends, to put myself out there in these situations. And I actually got severe acne as a teenager, and all of a sudden I was forced into being perceived, being bullied for my appearance as someone who was trying so hard to kind of just like blend into the background and get by, because I was feeling so overwhelmed. And all of a sudden I had this, you know, thing that made me kind of stick out a bit more, and I really struggled. This was when I started getting into a state of depression, and I really struggled. My mum would take me to school and she would have to sit in the car with me for about 10 minutes while I was bawling my eyes out in front of the school, having the worst stomachache, and I just couldn't get in. So she would take me home, she would literally drive me to school, sit there with me and take me home, and this went on for weeks, to the point where I just ended up staying off for a very long time, and my attendance was abysmal. The head teacher got involved. We had to have conversations with the school, and you know, it was kind of just deemed like, oh, she has anxiety, that is just what this is, like this is just anxiety. And yeah, it kind of just got harder and harder from that point. And in school there was multiple situations where I had panic attacks, which I now understand to be meltdowns, and it was hard. I remember having one in my art class with my art teacher, and this was during my GCSE, so we were, you know, deep in coursework and things like that, and I had chosen photography and art as 2 of my GCSEs, so I was always in the art building, and it just happened that I had the same teacher for both of these subjects. And I was sat there in art, which is something I loved because it was so like I was there pretty much every day because of having 2 classes in there, and the teacher I knew really well, so it was very much like I went there, it was familiar, stable, you know, I got on with it, it was great. And there was one time my art teacher came up to me, she was doing the rounds looking at people's work, she looked at my work and was just like, you need to redo this. And I got so overwhelmed that I could feel like, you know, when you're about to cry and it like you get choked up, and I could feel it like rising. And at the time obviously I thought, oh my god, I'm gonna have a panic attack, so I went to the toilet and had a meltdown in there for a very long time, until a student came and got me because I'd taken so long. I managed to calm myself down enough, went back to the class, and yeah, it kind of started up again where I was just crying, and uncontrollable crying is how my meltdowns have always been. Uncontrollable crying, usually can't say that many words. When they are more severe I do go mute, which I'll talk a bit later in the video, but it feels like I just have so much emotion, like I'm feeling everything to so much intensity that it's like I'm just bursting open, and that's how it felt. And I remember this was probably one of my first memories of having a public meltdown, and I felt so embarrassed, and my art teacher was there just trying to like comfort me. She was like hugging me, and obviously she'd given up her whole lunchtime just to sit with me while I was bawling my eyes out for over an hour, and she was just like, you're such a great student, like you always do amazing work, like I don't know what's going on basically. I think I really startled her, and yeah, it was hard. And I had a few smaller instances of that kind of thing during school, but that was definitely the most memorable and prominent, where I felt so much shame around it afterwards, so embarrassed. But I was really struggling. School was really hard, and it got to a point as well in year 10 and 11, so when we were deep in that coursework and doing exams and things, that we would have interventions after school, which was basically just to do revision. It was to do more coursework, to catch up on work. It was kind of just like timetabled slots that would go on for an extra hour or 2 hours every day after school. And with art and photography, they really loved interventions, so I was pretty much in there all of the time. And I remember like being sat there in the intervention, and just thinking, why isn't everyone like as exhausted as me? And I just figured that they were hiding it a lot better, and it was just because, well, obviously I can feel my experiences because I am me, but I can't feel theirs, and that's just how I put it down to. Because I was really struggling. I would go home and I would just pass out basically straight away. I was constantly struggling. I'd feel like a zombie. Like I just felt like, where I got to a point where I just didn't feel very present. It was after school that I decided to pursue photography as a career. I had already been doing photography since I was like 11 years old. My sister had a really well-known blog. She was doing amazing for it, and I was the photographer for her. So it was very cool, and it was something I was very experienced in by the time I got to college. I'd already been doing it for about 5 years, and I pursued that at college, and it was the first time where I felt like I could breathe, because it was so chill, like so chill being at an art college. It was the most incredible experience. And around that time I started to learn to drive. I was about 17, 18. I can't remember. I know I did it a little bit later. Maybe I was about 19. I'm not sure. All the years just blend into each other, don't they? But I was learning to drive, and I was struggling with learning to drive. It was really traumatic, the whole learning to drive experience. And I didn't really understand why at the time, but I went through, I think it was 5 different driving instructors in the end, because it got to a point where I would have panic attacks before every single lesson. Before every lesson, and I just really struggled with it. I'd get in the car, and I had the nicest driving instructor at one point. He was the loveliest person. He was so funny, and he just really knew what he was doing. He explained things so well. Like, I progressed amazingly with my driving with this tutor. But it got to a point where halfway through the lessons, I would start having panic attacks, and he didn't really understand why, and I definitely startled him, and I just thought it was my anxiety, and I just didn't really understand. I was just like, oh yeah, it's just because I'm anxious, like driving's scary. Obviously now I can look back and think, yeah, I was definitely overwhelmed. I don't believe I was afraid. I believe I was overwhelmed. There's a lot of things to do with driving, a lot of different processes to remember, and when you're learning to drive, you're constantly having to think and think and think and think. It's not natural. So yeah, definitely meltdowns. Around that time as well, I had just got into my first proper relationship, and it was during this relationship that I started having these situations, I guess, where we would have arguments, and then I would cry uncontrollably during these arguments. I've always really struggled with confrontation. And then in our most, I don't know if you'd call them severe arguments, but yeah, I would go completely mute, unable to communicate, unable to speak, completely mute for hours and hours and hours, to the point where we made our own accommodation so we could continue communicating, where we would have to get a phone and literally write in the notes app like things to each other, because I mean, well, he talked to me, but I had to write because I couldn't communicate in any other way because I was mute. And this happened multiple times, and I always felt really weird about this. I was like, wow, my anxiety is that severe that I go mute. Like, that's crazy. Like, it felt so severe. Obviously, again, now we look back at that, and that was definitely a meltdown. So I understand that in my most severe meltdowns, when I'm that overwhelmed, I do go mute, and that is something I am aware of now, and I have to find ways to accommodate. But obviously, all of these experiences growing up, it was just labelled anxiety. I went to therapy twice before I was an adult, 2 different times, 2 different therapists, and you know, they'd always just said anxiety. And I went through talking therapy, and I had CBT I did find actually quite helpful, and then as an adult I've been to therapy twice, more since then. Both talking therapies since then, and again it was just like, yeah, it's anxiety. And you know, when you were suffering with your acne, you had a period of depression. I've had spouts of depression through my life, and that's kind of just like what it was. It was just like, yeah, Tabby, you are an anxious person, like you do have childhood trauma, and it is most likely CPTSD and social anxiety. And I was like, okay, that's what it is. I started getting IBS from the age of about 19, I think, onwards. And again, we put this down to anxiety. You know, nervous stomach causes IBS in the most severe of circumstances. And I was like, okay, that's just what I am. That's just who I am. And then about 2 years ago, I started having and really struggling with periods, to the point where I would have my period every month and I would pass out. Like literally pass out because of the pain. Like I literally pass out. And it was really scary. It was really severe pain where I would get really hot. I would pass out. I'd get really dehydrated, obviously, and the pain was excruciating. I went to A&E multiple times. They were just like, it's suspected endometriosis. I'd already been through a whole process of this when I was about 18, I think, where I had an MRI done regarding that. Nothing was found. It was kind of just left. And I was like, oh, I guess, you know, I could be there. I was always told that it's what's it called? Loophole surgery, is that right? Is the only way to find endometriosis. It's not always seen on MRI scans and things, or ultrasounds. So I went through the whole period of having hospital appointments, and I was booked in for, it's a very minor surgery, but surgery is all scary. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have that in January. And then I went through a breakup with my now ex, and we'd been together for 7 years. And then all of a sudden, after about a year of having these excruciating periods where I would literally pass out from pain every month, I'd been given codeine tablets to deal with the severity of the pain. We broke up the next month. I stopped having painful periods, and I haven't had painful periods since. It's been 2 years, so I cancelled my surgery. And yeah, it's just crazy, like, when you have that knowledge of your autism. And I really do think my autism played a massive part in, like, even the endometriosis situation, because when you're that dysregulated for so long, it causes so much harm to your body. When you're autistic, you're neurodivergent, you naturally struggle a lot more with dysregulation. You're constantly in chronic stress, you're constantly masking, you're constantly struggling and overthinking, and that's why so many of us do have anxiety as well as, you know, being autistic or whatever. And it's really crazy when you get to look back on your whole life and see how all of these situations were connected in such a deeper way than you even anticipated. And that's why it does come with so much grief, because you're just like, wow, I've went my whole life not fully understanding myself, not really being able to accommodate myself in the way that I needed, and not being able to get that support that I needed to live a, you know, a better life, a less stress life, like an actual life that would fit me. And it does come with so much grief, and it's crazy. I even have seen it, well, especially in my careers, my whole history of jobs and things like that. I graduated from university with a degree in commercial photography, and I was very fortunate enough to get a job straight out of university to work as a photographer, a school photographer. I did 1 day in that job, went away on holiday for a week, came back and quit the job. Yeah, they weren't too happy about that. But I literally did a day in that job, and I was so overwhelmed. I was like, I cannot do this. They're expecting me to drive like 2-3 hours at 6 a.m, 5 a.m to places in Scotland and like all over the UK to get to different schools. I was like, I'm not that confident of a driving. I do find driving incredibly overwhelming. Like, I understood this about myself, even though I had passed first time. People said I was a great driver. Didn't matter, it was incredibly overwhelming for me. And I was like, yeah, they want me to do that they didn't explain that before I got the job. And I was gonna be with kids all day and photos, and I have no experience with kids. No experience with kids. I find being around kids incredibly overwhelming. I'm the youngest child in my entire family. I've never been around babies and never been around kids, and I don't know how to interact with them, to be honest. I do find that incredibly overwhelming, along with the social aspects of the whole thing. I left that one day and thought, oh my god, is this going to be my life? Like, how exciting, I'm making my first like big girl money. But I was like, I don't think I can cope with this, and I knew that deep in my core. I knew that I couldn't do it. So I had a big conversation with my mum at the time, and I decided to pursue a different career, a self-employed career in beauty. So I qualified in a bunch of beauty things. I qualified in nails and brows and lashes. What else? There was a very long list. A lot of cosmetology stuff basically. And yeah, I opened my own nail bar at first, and struggled a lot with doing nails because of the big social aspect of someone being sat in front of you for like up to 2 hours, where you're constantly having to socialize with them. It felt like so much masking, but obviously I didn't really know why I was so exhausted at that time. I was just like, oh, this is a lot. So eventually I decided to change fully to facials and skin health, you know, something that I had already been so passionate about because of my own history of dealing with acne. And I was like, yeah, this makes so much sense, and I thrived in this career. I loved working with skin. I was still finding a lot of things really difficult. Running your own business felt like a lot of hustle, like the way I was doing it. I did get like a business coach, but I was very much just like deep in the hustle. It was very like marketing bro type things where you constantly just like sell, and I was just like so exhausted and overwhelmed all of the time. It got to a point last year where I wrote and published a whole freaking book on acne. It's on Amazon. I won 21st in the UK for Skin Specialist of the Year. Very cool. I was then interviewed for my local newspaper. I talked on the radio. This was all in the span of about 3 months, and then I decided to move my business, which I'd then had for about 4 years, to a new location completely in a different county, which was a big risk because obviously my clientele, would they move with me, that type of thing. Big financial risk. Then things started falling apart. The structures that I'd built to now what I know to be scripting, my whole business, how I talk to people, what I would say to people, where I would stand, all of that fell apart with me moving. There was business work going on in the new premise, not ideal with facials. I constantly didn't know when and what and how and any of the stuff that I needed, you know, the rules, the guidelines, and things started falling apart. And that was the first time that I thought, there is something going on with me, because I felt like I was really struggling. I felt like my head wasn't okay. I was like, I feel like I'm going to have a mental breakdown. That's how it felt. So I went to the doctors and got put in for an ADHD screening, and then I was told it's probably autism, Tabby. And here we are. Burnout hit from that point on. It like registered something in my brain. Everything blew up. Closed my skin clinic. Burnout. Here we are. Yeah, so that is how I got here. It's been a really long journey of self-love and compassion, and just like trying to figure out my life, like just being a girl in my 20s, discovering who I am really, and trying to find out like my identity for the first time in my life, because it's always just been a culmination, I don't know, of things that I thought I should be. When you mask for that long, when you finally take off the mask subconsciously, it's like for the first time in your life you have to kind of think about like, who am I? Who am I when I'm not people pleasing, when I'm not trying to fit into these roles? who am I as a person, like how do I accommodate myself now, how do I like live a better life basically, where I'm constantly just not struggling and stuff. And it's been a lot trying to figure all of that out for the last 10 months really, and I've been slowly accommodating myself, changing to like flavoured toothpaste, wearing my socks inside out, getting rid of loads of clothes in my wardrobe that were just like always made me uncomfortable but I just wore, and just having so much compassion and just like learning about myself all of the time. And I've been sharing that kind of journey since I hit burnout, especially over on my Instagram, and I've started making the most beautiful community of people who understand me. And it's literally been the first time in my entire life where people have like mirrored back my experiences. Like people have commented on like my videos where I'm talking about these things and said, that's me, that's my experience too, and it felt so validating. It does feel so good, which is now why I post what I do. And I am always someone who's super ambitious and I have a lot of big dreams, and now I see the kind of the path forward, if that makes sense. Like I know that I'm always going to be a self-employed girly. I know I cannot deal with traditional jobs. My school experience taught me that. It was absolutely hell, to be honest. I struggled so much. It was incredibly traumatic. And even though I still feel a lot of shame and guilt about not doing things the traditional way, like I have to stay loyal to the struggle that a lot of people are dealing with traditional jobs, I also refuse to put myself through that again, because I know that it would just constantly lead to burnout and burnout and burnout over and over again in this cycle that in the end is just going to kill me off sooner. Because let's be real, if I'm not accommodating myself, I'm causing harm to myself and my health, mental health, physical health, all of the health. So I want to become a sound healer. I haven't started training yet as of posting this video. To be honest, I'm kind of trying to figure out the financials of starting that, because obviously when I close my skin clinic, yeah, no income. But I can totally see me being a sound healer. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be so cool. Yeah, oh, I'm so excited. If you can't tell, I can't stop grinning. But that is totally what I see me doing, like hosting sound baths and mainly making like a online platform for that, to help regulate nervous systems, particularly of fellow neurodivergents that really need the regulation. So yeah, that is what I'm working towards at the moment, whilst kind of sharing parts of my life, parts of how I'm accommodating myself and my journey, and hoping you feel seen in my experiences, or that you maybe get like some help with how you can accommodate yourself as well. Hopefully it sparks up ideas and all of that type of thing. But that is kind of my story. I kind of just wanted to make this kind of introduction. Like I've been posting on YouTube like on and off for a few years, but I wanted to come back and actually start talking about my autism now that I have a lot more understanding about it, and I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing my experiences as well. So yeah, I hope that you stick around, so please subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to have you here, and definitely follow me over on Instagram as well. It's definitely like a lot more personal over there, which is really lovely. And yeah, I'm Tabitha, either or, and I hope to see you very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.